Hello, YouTube. My name is Alan, and it's that time. Once again, let's talk metal. For this episode, going to be doing a book review. I recently finished reading this one. It's AC/DC Maximum Rock and Roll, subtitled The Ultimate Story of the World's Greatest Rock and Roll Band. This is by Murray Englehart and Arnaud Duro. I'm going to pronounce it French because it looks French. If it's not French, oops. And this came out first in 2006. Picked it up recently at a flea market. It was only $8 and figured, yeah, I haven't read a good, hard rock heavy metal book in a few months. So it was a good time to pick one up. So let's just go ahead and jump right into it. First off, AC/DC is one of those bands people tend to either love or just, get really sick of. Not really a heavy metal band, of course. They never liked being called heavy metal. And to be fair, putting them in the heavy metal category would be a bit of a stretch. They're, pretty much a straightforward kind of, rock and roll band, hard rock band, something like that. Doesn't really matter. The music's what's important. And, the book, as you can tell just by sheer size, goes into a pretty good amount of detail with it. The book's laid out chronologically like most biographies are. You have to, go through the chapters of, when they were tiny wee lads back, in, the primeval days of yore and learn about running around at school and stuff like that. Some people don't like that material. Some people find it interesting. Where this book actually starts, though, isn't talking about, Angus and Malcolm and their early days. It actually spends the first chapter or two talking about George Young and his kind of brush with success in his band, the Easy Beats. So I wasn't expecting this when I started the book. It's kind of like, we're definitely backing up a little further than I would have expected here. However, that material is pretty important. George had a big hand, of course, in AC/DC's career with helping with writing and producing and stuff like that. And yeah, seeing the trials and tribulations that he went through with his own band, which, had a fair amount of success, but kind of came up just a little bit short. They were sort of, victims of the record industry, didn't quite get over that hoop, although they got really close to it. And those experiences very much colored his perceptions of, what it's like to be in a band, what it's like to deal with the record industry. And that had, of course, then big impressions on Malcolm and Angus once they had their AC/DC project up and running. So that background material actually I found pretty interesting and very relevant to the story of AC/DC. I didn't really know a lot about George Young's past, so it was cool to have that included. All right, then of course you start working through all the early years, the different bands that, Malcolm and Angus, were involved with a little here and there until they finally figured out, yeah, we should just be in the band together and take it from there. In terms of writing style, the book reads quite well. It's an easy read. It's very kind of straightforward. Here's the details. Here are interview clips with lots of people. And that's one of the things that's pretty impressive. They did talk to a lot of people and get quotes from them worked into this. Not just band members, but members from some of those other previous acts that the guys were involved with. They have lots of takes from different managers, producers, record executives, anybody who was pretty close to the band. It seems like they made a real effort to track them down and, if important, get that material included in the book. So that part's pretty impressive. But again, it also keeps moving along pretty well. It doesn't get bogged down in really long quotations. Usually it's like a short paragraph, maybe two. And the narrative keeps moving forward. So you never feel like you're slogging through chapters. Everything moves at a pretty good pace, kind of appropriate for a book about AC/DC. But yeah, it makes for a pretty engaging read as well. In terms of organization, once you get through those, kind of early life experience chapters, the book is laid out where it's essentially one chapter per album. So You have a chapter about, the high voltage recordings and era, chapter about TNT, chapter about, each subsequent album all the way up through Stiff Upper Lip. Since the book is published in 2006, that's the last one that got covered. I really like this organization. It appeals to me, I guess, as a record collector, because that's often how we tend to think of bands, is the eras of each album. But it also makes it very easy to go back and look things up. If 6 months from now I'm trying to remember, oh yeah, what did they say about the Highway to Hell tour? It's very easy to find that in here. Go to the chapter called Highway to Hell and read the part that you want to. And not all biographies or autobiographies do this. Sometimes it can be a real pain, or it's just like chapter 17. Is this the Highway to Hell chapter? No, this is the Fly on the Wall chapter. Okay, let's flip back a few chapters, and you just kind of have to slowly find the material you want by trial and error. So I really like the way the book was laid out and organized. There's several sets of color photo inserts, also a lot of older black and white photos too. So if you enjoy the pictures, there's lots of those. The pictures do get a little samey after a while. As a relatively no frills rock and roll band, it's like, here's a picture of Malcolm playing the guitar. Yeah, you can see the next section of pictures 100 pages later or 200 pages later. It's like, here's another picture of Malcolm playing the guitar, or sorry, Angus playing the guitar. It's cool to see the pictures, but it's not like it's a band that went through drastic, changes in style or staging or anything like that. So yeah, after you've seen the 16th picture of, Angus playing the guitar, it's like, well, okay, I think we've kind of know what he looks like. That's him playing the guitar, okay. And so the pictures are neat, but I don't know if there's anything spectacular. Let's see, other things to note about the book. A couple of things that, to nitpick a bit, things that don't make the book perfect. One thing is that the book is very front-loaded, of course, towards the Bon Scott era. This isn't necessarily surprising. That's the era most people are most interested in. But it's a pretty drastic shift. I put a bookmark in here so you could kind of see the division. So this first chunk of the book, up to page 353, that's where you have just gotten to the end of Back in Black. So all of this is, band history, Bon Scott material, Bon's death, and replacing Bon with Brian Johnson. So then you have less than 100 pages left, or right at 100 pages, for everything from Those About to Rock up to Stiff Upper Lip. So you cram about 25 years worth of the band's history into 100 pages, whereas the first 6 or 7, 8 years, takes 350 pages to go through. It's a little bit of an uneven distribution, to say the least. And one thing that kind of contributes to this is the chapters. Once you get to that chapter on For Those About to Rock, the chapters start getting noticeably shorter. And it's very often, here's how they went about recording the album. Here's a note if there was a lineup change, a couple of notes about the tours they did, and move on to the next one. It starts to become a little formulaic and cookie cutter. In a way, I guess that's not surprising either. Let's face it, that's how music fans often treat catalogs for these long legacy bands. There's a period we're really interested in. It tends to be the early period. And then when you're discussing the later stuff, it just feels like there's not as much to say, or people just aren't interested in going into the same level of detail. I've noticed this when, I've participated in live streams about some of these legacy bands. Groups like Iron Maiden, people can talk forever about the first 7 albums. You get into the 90s albums and the 2000 albums, and the conversation moves along a lot faster because people just don't have a lot that they want to discuss on those albums. Same for Judas Priest. You could spend, books writing about everything up to Painkiller. Everything after Painkiller, you could write pamphlets about. It goes on and on the same kind of way. So it still would have been nice maybe to have a little more detail about some of the 80s and 90s and 2000s material. It just felt like, yeah, in a way they're kind of just barreling. It's like, okay, you've already read the stuff we know you want to read, so here's the still covering the bases, but we're going to keep it more just to those basics. Let's see other things about the book. The book definitely has this kind of narrative goal in mind, that they're going to portray this band as like the most brilliant guitar duo possibly in the history of rock. They're going to portray them throughout the book as being these hard-nosed, take no shit from nobody kind of attitude. And the third big kind of long-running theme in the book is that this band, every time they take the stage, nobody can touch them. Their shit doth not stink. If you read through this, you would really get the impression that AC/DC has maybe done 3 subpar live performances in their entire career. And they do point those out. When they get to the Castle Donington performances, they do mention that the band always felt like, those were not our best shows for whatever reason. That stage was just never very kind to us. But every other performance is just talked over in these, extremely glowing terms. They're a good live band, sure. I've seen them live. Yeah, fun, good band. But they really are portrayed here as just almost, the was it apotheosis of rock and roll distilled down into this one band. So it's not unusual for biographies to want to kind of force a narrative that way. Tony Iommi's autobiography Iron Man, it really focused on this point that, yes, look, I was kind of a hard-nosed prick sometimes, but someone's got to drive that bus, and it had to be me to keep Black Sabbath on the rails. It's almost like this kind of justification of everything we've done. You can get the sense from a lot of the stories included here that AC/DC were not always an easy band to work with. If you were touring with them or just another rock band of the era, this band really kind of makes it seem like AC/DC just almost intentionally wanted to embarrass, humiliate, and drive you off the stage and prove they were better. Okay, sure. Is that a good thing? They're making it definitely sound like, that's kind of their driving force in here. A lot of people could probably take the approach, though, too, that, these guys were kind of jerks to us at one point or another in their careers. But of course, you're not going to get that perspective in the biography. That's something else to note. When you hit some of the rocky patches in the band's history, they feel like they are a little glossed over, especially when you get into that section on the 80s albums, where you started to have a little more, turnover in the lineup. Those things are touched on, but they're not really fully explained. Like, I don't think they really just flat out state, why was Phil Rudd eventually, kicked out of the band? They kind of dance around it a little bit, that he was having some issues and there's a couple of weird situations that came up, but they never flat out say, here's the straw that broke the camel's back. Here's what was wrong with Phil. The same when they get into, Malcolm's, issues with drinking too much. They definitely, address it, but it's done in a pretty low key way. It's like, okay, eventually Malcolm knew he had a problem, took some time off, he beat it, he came right back. Okay, nothing else to see here. Now, I'm not saying they need to dwell on those kind of, salacious issues. That's not the reason I read these kind of books. I don't need to know the name of every groupie who showed up at their door or anything like that. But it was notable that they do kind of spend a lot of time talking up the positives. But yeah, where somebody was having issues with drugs or alcohol, or a band member had to be dismissed, it's not, they certainly don't dwell on that very much. They kind of move right along to the next list of tour dates where they conquered Europe all over again. And 80, they always give the dates, how many thousands and tens of thousands of people showed up and how awesome the show was. Would have been nice to have seen a little bit more on some of those problems they had behind the scenes. Other issues or things to point out with the book, hit a lot of the big ones at this point. There's lots of good material about the Bond era, of course. it was a nice read because it also kind of clears up a few of the different misconceptions about AC/DC. This was a band that, there's always been all kinds of weird stories and rumors about, of course. When you're this popular on a global stage, the rumor mill is a thing. Yeah, I remember hearing stories, as a kid, for instance, like, oh, Brian Johnson, used to be AC/DC's limo driver. Yeah, right. They touch a little bit on some of the, PMRC stuff, which AC/DC isn't one we typically think of as being drug into that. That usually seems to center, we think of like Twisted Sister, being at the center of that controversy. But yeah, I remember, some of those different acronyms, like, in the mid 80s, people running around claiming, oh, it stands for AC/DC stands for After Christ, Devil Comes, and stuff like that. So it clears up, a few things here and there about some of those, odd stories that popped up over time, which is nice, to kind of set the record straight on any of those weird things still stuck in the back of your mind from when you're 18 or whatever, and you first learned about the band. And anything else about the band? Yeah, that's about it. At the end, there is, a nice section on the discography. They did mention things like, the different pressings of the albums, how the Australian or European versions differed from the US versions. Because again, a lot of these albums got released out of order back in the late 70s and early 80s. For example, Atlantic Records didn't release Dirty Deeds in the US when it came out. They didn't think it was a very good album and wanted nothing to do with it. So that album didn't get a US pressing until much later, after Back in Black. And so, the track list is a little bit different. Cover art's different. So they did a good job documenting that kind of stuff as well. So I think that, kind of covers some, the highlights and, a few, the issues with the book overall. If you're interested in the band, you just want something that's a relatively easy but fun read, it's a good book to pick up. I'm guessing it's out of print by this point. It's been pushing 20 years since it came out, but it's probably not a hard one to track down in a local used bookstore or online. So yeah, that's about going to do it for my take on AC/DC's Maximum Rock and Roll. So now, let's talk metal, or at least AC/DC, in the comments down below. Have you read the book? And if so, well, what did you think of it? There are probably several other books about the band that I am not familiar with. Are there others that you would recommend that you think are better than this volume? Maybe there are some that focus a little bit more on the later parts of the band's career, or maybe there's an updated version that follows the band up to the current day. That's always one problem with releasing a biography of a band that's still active. You kind of just stop whenever the book goes to print. So, there's another 15, 17 years worth of AC/DC history that's not covered in this book because of the time it came out. So if you have recommendations for other good sources of AC/DC reading material for people, please post it in the comments down below so other folks can check it out too. All right, that is going to do it for this video. So, as always, everybody please take care, and until next time, keep banging your head.